think you have to be a little bit more conservative by focusing on true operations, and the only way to really get an insight into true operations is to talk to true operators.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Casman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Listen, if you're enjoying this show, do me one quick but little favor and leave us that rating and review. We want to hear from you and hear what you love about the show, but also get some honest feedback if there's anything we can do to make the show work harder for your investing goals. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. We've got a great show today. We're going to be talking to Jason Baik. They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the Mastermind button today. Now, Jason Baik is a former data scientist with over 350 units in multifamily. Now, Jason is an underwriter, and he also is an asset manager that teaches others to underwrite to minimize risk. Let's welcome to the show, Jason Baik.
Thanks for having me, John.
Absolutely, Jason. I went over your bio at a very high level. Why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of those gaps?
Yeah, sure. So, kind of like you mentioned, I started off in corporate America as a data scientist. Spent a little under a decade just doing the regular 9 to 5 grind. About 3 years ago, I decided that I had a small window before I wanted to start a family, where I could try to, follow my dream of being an entrepreneur. And so I decided to pivot into real estate when I had absolutely no real estate experience. I knew a lot about numbers and spreadsheets, but I barely understood how a house held itself together. I just kind of thought it was, magic behind these drywalls. But I decided to take a chance on myself for the first time in my life. And yeah, I find myself here today. So today I'm focused pretty much only on multifamily. I spend a little bit of time doing non-residential commercial and analyzing deals. But I'm part of Compounding Capital Group with my partner, Jay Balakar. And most of what we do is multifamily out of the Cincinnati area.
I love it, man. You talked about having this short window, right? A little window there to try to shoot for the, swing for the fences, if you will, and, make it happen before you start a family. So you took that leap of faith and made that happen, despite not really having a background in real estate. You mentioned that you weren't really sure how houses even stay together. So I think that's really interesting. Talk to us more about, making that decision to go full into real estate when you didn't have kind of that real estate background.
Yeah, so I think part of the jump is sort of being self-aware enough to know myself. I know that I have a very addictive personality in that if I get really interested in something, if I want to learn about a specific topic, I go all in, and I'm pretty good at it. Now, that isn't to say that I didn't have a hard time for the first year and a half. I was kind of, waffling around, not really knowing what to do. But in hindsight, I mean, I'm glad I made the shift, and it's one that I think will reward me for the rest of my career. It was definitely hard though, where I didn't have a single other connection in real estate. My family doesn't do real estate. My friends don't do real estate. They're engineers or lawyers or doctors, sort of normal corporate jobs. But I figured, if I broke it down into the simplest steps, I had to network with other people down in the area, and then every time I met someone that was a real estate investor, I sort of just asked what they did or how they learned, and kind of just followed those breadcrumbs until I eventually learned myself.
I like that you talked about one, just not necessarily having those people around you. So you recognized you needed to really expand your network when you came across other real estate investors, asking them questions, being interested. People love to talk about themselves and share more information. So if you're open and truly curiously interested in other people, They're usually happy to share a little bit more information. So I'm glad you're able to do that. Let's talk about, what you're doing today, right? You mentioned being a former data scientist. Now you focus on the numbers, underwriting, being an asset manager, but all this coming from a background where you weren't really understanding drywall and maybe some of the mechanical aspects of the actual real estate. Reconcile that for me, right? How did you learn how to manage real estate without really having that full understanding of what it took to create or withheld, or I shouldn't say withheld, but either to create or maintain these real estate assets?
Right. So I'm a big believer in at least understanding how something that you're working on functions. So in order to get up to speed in terms of sort of the construction aspect of it, I did big gut renovations myself. I, took on some single family home properties that needed a lot of help. They weren't livable, but I figured that that hands-on direct experience was the fastest way for me to really understand what actually goes into keeping a house together. So the prospect of permitting for electrical and plumbing, understanding the difference between uh, PVC and cast iron piping, knowing how much drywall costs, and everything that goes into buying the vanities and the toilets and the appliances. I sort of took on myself. I didn't necessarily haul the material. Obviously, I hired contractors for that, but visiting those sites every single week, every few days to really get an understanding of what the contractors were doing, at least helped me gain the knowledge of how this asset was kept together. The easier part for me was actually the financials of it, understanding how much income a property generates, how much expenses it has to go out every single month from the checking account, and then calculating DSCR and profit. And that part was a lot easier because it was very similar to what I used to do in corporate America. So I think I always had the skill set that could sort of wrap around whatever core it was. And all I had to do was understand the core of how houses functioned and how they kept themselves together. And so that's kind of how I married the two worlds.
You gave a great insight. So, whether or not you come from a real estate background, there's an opportunity for you to get into multifamily and to find a path that is your own. And it really comes from leaning on your own skill set. For you, understanding the numbers, that's what you were doing in your corporate job. So, getting into underwriting was where you felt more natural, but you also minimized or neutralized your weaknesses. While you didn't really understand construction, you took it upon yourself to get into projects that push you and forced you to learn more so you can understand what does it take to take this property from where it is today, renovating it completely and getting across the finish line. So now when you go into multifamily, you have some knowledge. It's not to say it's an expertise, right? But you're familiar, you know what it takes, you know what things are going to cost, you know what the process should be. That's going to make you more empowered. And I think if we can think about it from a neutralizing our weaknesses, sometimes that means partnering with someone else. Sometimes that means hiring someone else. Sometimes it means doing it yourself and recognizing that it's not going to be the best in the world performance, but it's adequate, right? And that's really important. Is that the big difference between single family investing and multifamily is with multifamily, you will hear this over and over and over, but it is a team sport, right? There's going to be multiple people. It's a company. It's a business that you're investing in. With single family, it is more of a hustle, right? It's a side project. It's something you're going to do to put a little money in your pocket. You do not have the ability to bring five partners into a house flip. There just simply isn't enough profit to go around. But on a multifamily, you can do that and you can tap into different skill sets. So, really unique experience and skill set there. You talked about Jay and your partner at Compounding Capital. Talk to me about kind of how you all came together to create this company.
Yeah, so I guess connecting it to what you were just saying, I always knew that larger deals was my eventual goal. Single family homes was kind of a means to get there. And I'm a big believer in at least understanding the basics of what's going on. Like I know how our accountant runs his books. I know, some of the reasons why we need a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer myself. I'm not an accountant myself. I'm not a contractor myself, but I at least know enough so that I can vet the right partners and make sure that at least progress is being made on projects that we have going on. And now going back to the question of sort of how Jay and I connected, so it was through a very organic sort of a referral. There was someone that he and I knew in like a mutual contact. The mutual contact suggested that we meet because he thought that we would be a good fit, and it kind of worked from there. Before I met Jay, though, I actually had tried about a dozen other partnerships that, in hindsight, were ill-advised, and they were essentially based off of like a handshake agreement. I would meet an individual once at like one meetup or even just like over one single Zoom call. And I would be, yeah, sure, yeah, let's totally partner and try to do stuff. And then it would only take, a few weeks. I think the longest partnership was maybe 2 months before I realized we just did had different working personalities, or maybe we had skill sets that were too similar, so that there was really no one that was doing the stuff that neither of us wanted to do. And so when I met Jay, I took it a lot slower, based off the previous, failed partnerships that I had. And so instead of jumping into a partnership right away, I actually talked to Jay for about 6 months weekly on a Zoom call, not necessarily to talk about like business solely, but to get to know him, to talk about his goals, his dreams, sort of his career path, talk about family and friends. And even after those 6 months, I decided to take a little bit of a leap of faith and actually flew over to Cincinnati for an entire week. And I stayed with Jay, and we got to hang out, get good food, meet other investors, see a few properties together. And it was only after that sort of lengthy process of vetting that we decided to finally work together, almost 6 or 7 months after we had initially met. And I had a brand, Jay had a brand, but I'm pretty back end. Like I do all the back end number crunching. Jay was a little bit more like customer facing, if you will. So I decided to join him in compounding capital instead of doing anything more complicated. So yeah, that's how we became partners. And so Jay had compounding capital for I think a few years before me. Also focused on sort of smaller multifamily, and we've kind of grown it to what it is today.
I love it, man. You just gave a almost a master class on building partnerships, right? And I want to dig a little bit more. You mentioned almost a dozen or so failed partnerships that you realize typically within the first couple of weeks. The longest partnership being about 2 months. So with Jay, you really want to take your time. First of all, one of the
Mhm.
key insights there is that this is someone who was introduced to you all, right? So you had a mutual connection. Typically, if someone's going to make that introduction, there's something they like about each of you where they believe it will be a good fit, right? So they're not going to introduce you to somebody they know is going to flake on you or know isn't as motivated to make something happen. So it was good to have that initial introduction. Even still, you took it slow. You talked to each other once a week on Zoom calls. After about 6 or so months, you decided to get on a plane, come out to Cincinnati, sit down with Jay. Not just sit down with Jay, but stay with Jay. Whoa, that's a lot, right? To sit and stay in his house and get to know him, up close and personal, for about a week or so. And then from there, you were able to realize that, hey, a partnership here could work. I just think it's great to understand what it takes to kind of vet a partner. I see often that people go into partnerships and they don't pan out. And part of the challenge is they simply didn't ask the right questions or get to know that individual. And people are focused on kind of their immediate goal. Talk to me about kind of that aspect of it, right? It's one thing to go into one deal together. I think once people are in a deal, that's when they realize whether or not this partnership is really going to work. Talk to me about kind of the next steps of that partnership after doing that first deal.
Yeah, I think you hit a lot of key points where a lot of people I think have very short-term thinking. They just want to get started. They really want to get their foot in the door. And I was the same way. That's kind of what led to me not really vetting these, failed partnerships and kind of just, getting ahead of myself. But with Jay, I think getting to understand what his long-term goals were, making sure that they were aligned with what I wanted, making sure that we both candidly understood and kind of communicated what we were both good at and bad at, so we can see the overlap in sort of, I'll call like human capital that can kind of work together in synergy. I think that was important. I think even something as simple as personality, when you are meeting someone at a catered event, everyone's going to put their best foot forward. Assumedly, you don't really know they're like when the pressure's on. You don't know what they're like when times are bad, and so I think it does just take a lot of organic time together to really understand if the personality of the person that you're talking with matches. Now, obviously, there's only so much vetting you can do before you get in on that first deal together. You can't really simulate like a terrible event happening or a deal failing or being tough. But for me, I think because I took so much time to get to really know Jay and not just focus on his like business practices, but get to know his morals and values and his dreams and hopes and his weaknesses. I think that's what really helped me feel comfortable taking that leap of faith. It will always still be a leap of faith getting into a partnership, but it's a much smaller leap of faith than if I met someone randomly on the street and said, "Yeah, let's be partners together." And ever since then, obviously, working with Jay has been an incredible fun experience. Not everything has been rosy. We have disagreements. We have run into hiccups and obstacles on the deals that we're in. But because I trust Jay and because I got to know him, I think that's helped things be so much easier long term. Or even if we disagree, we're not shouting at each other. We're not, being mean or malicious. We're logically talking things through. We're trying to make the best decision for ourselves and for the company. We're always trying to find a compromise. And I think I knew that Jay was the right person because I liked his personality and I knew it matched mine, and I knew that he would be respectful and a hard worker and honest and communicative. So I think those were the key things that I looked out for, and fortunately, they have kind of still remain true to this day.
Yeah, you gave some great feedback right there. You talked about some of the attributes you liked in your partner, right? Someone who's respectful, someone who's communicative, someone who is honest, someone who's a hard worker. Those are some of the key things. And it's natural and healthy for partnerships to have some friction. You shouldn't be agreeing on every single thing. If so, you guys aren't pushing it enough. So there should be
Oh,
some natural friction. But you can have that friction in a respectful way, in a way that is conducive to reaching a resolution that doesn't, minimize one of the partners. So I like how you talked about that. Let's transition a little bit, right? We talked about the partnerships. Your role, one of your primary roles, is on the underwriting side and the asset management. When it comes to underwriting, what are some of the key challenges or key mistakes you see other people making?
That's a good question. The biggest one that I see is that people don't validate every assumption that they make, and it might look nice on a presentation, but from the perspective of another underwriter, it sort of raises red flags. I think the classic example of that is sort of year over year rent growth. I've seen a lot of underwriting where the person that underwrote it put 7% year over year rent growth organically, and my question is always like, oh yeah, where did you get that number from? And their response is, oh, like I just know. And that's always a indication of maybe optimism or maybe over optimism, and it makes me feel uncomfortable with putting my money into that deal. Now, I'm a big believer because I come from a data background. I've had my findings or my code or whatever I put in front of someone else heavily peer reviewed and tested. And so it's my belief that every number that you use to uh, do your underwriting should have some sort of justification. If you say that year over year rent growth is 7%, and you can show me for the last 5 years year over year rent growth in that specific market has been anywhere from 6 to 9%, then that's okay. That I will trust. But if you just pull a number out of thin air and say that it's justified because you saw someone else put that down, I think that kind of leads to a chain of people just copying what they see elsewhere, but not necessarily really knowing the nuances of why that number is being used. So yeah, a lot of misguided assumptions. I'd say is sort of the biggest red flag that I see in other people's underwriting.
Yeah, those misguided assumptions I think are key, right? Because, you mentioned just the rent growth. I would say too, looking back, it's one thing, but you also have to make sure that those same factors are in place looking forward. Because just because something grew for 7% for the last 5 years, that doesn't guarantee or even imply that it's going to do the same thing for not the next 5, not even the next year, right? We've seen that a lot recently where interest rates have certainly changed up, but rent growth has slowed, if not gone negative in certain markets. So certainly something to keep in mind. Um, you talked about those assumptions. What are some ways that we can check it? Because I know for some people, they look at that T12 and they just copy kind of the numbers in there and paste it into their own assumptions. But what do you recommend people do to kind of verify some of those key points?
So I guess I'll start backwards and say once you start taking down deals in a specific area and you have some experience, it gets so much easier. I know how much water costs or electricity costs or what property management fees are in a specific area because I have property managers and I pay for water on other properties. So it does get a lot easier when you're first starting out. I remember I had the same struggles where you don't know what you don't know, right? It's not like there's a centralized resource where, everyone gives you the answers. And so my sort of core recommendation is always to try to talk to one other operators in the area and two other property managers. So if someone is going to be hired to be your property manager, the theory is that they should be more upfront with you. So if you're putting out like, $100 per unit for maintenance and repairs, they should be the ones that are flagging like, hey, that's way too low. Like we have a lot of expenses that go into taking care of a property that's this age or in this area. So they'll hopefully be able to guide you in the right direction. Um, I've heard that, if you use the underwriter for lenders, they will also sort of make sure that some of your assumptions are vetted. But I would try to stick more closely to owners, other apartment operators, and property managers because lenders, they're just different beasts. They're, multi-million, if not multi-billion dollar banks, and they can write whatever they want and they'll still be comfortable and happy at the end of the day because they've got enough money to cushion whatever. You are not a lender. You don't have billions of dollars. So I think you have to be a little bit more conservative by focusing on true operations. And the only way to really get an insight into true operations is to talk to true operators.
I love everything you just said, right? Especially that clarification because, we certainly have used lenders and they have good insight and there's certainly vantage points. So, one aspect on the lenders is particularly if you have a lender that has a lot of properties or a lot of loans in one market, they can take a look at that entire sub market and say, hey, across our 50 assets here, here's what we're typically seeing on, water or whatever it is, right? But to your point, you got to keep in mind the data they're getting is really reported data from the operator. So there may be at times where some people may either manipulate or misrepresent what those actual figures are for their lender just to qualify for their loans. I'm not saying people do that, but it wouldn't shock me if they do. So you're better off going directly to the source, right? Talking to those owners, talking to those property management companies, getting those real figures, and then using that data to help inform your underwriting. Really great tips there. I know you said that for people who want to learn more about underwriting, you have it kind of some education available at theunderwritinglab.com. People can check that out there. And then also you've got information on the investing side at compoundingcapitalgroup.com. So people can check those out. We'll make sure we link to both of those in our show notes. Um, Talk to me a little bit about just the data from your standpoint. When you kind of project and looking forward, and when you're making different assumptions about deals and what's going to happen, what are some key data points you look at and pay attention to?
So I come from a background of what's called like econometric modeling, which is taking real world data and trying to project how sort of the future will look. And so that's sort of a skill set that I've carried over to real estate because it's actually very applicable. So the goal of, underwriting is to use the data that you have from the seller in terms of the T12 or the rent roll or whatever, incorporate your own knowledge and try to predict to the best of your abilities how the property will perform for the next, X years, however long your hold is. So there's never a case. I would argue that there's probably never a case in, the world where someone's underwriting exactly match the performance of a property, just because there's way too many variables that go on. And even on the deals that we've taken down, we've always run into at least one problem per deal that's just something that we never could have thought of, whether it's, maybe permitting issues with the local county, maybe it's, a random fire or a random flood that happens that, you can't really plan for. But I think the way that I underwrite is making sure that I take the most risk mitigated approach possible and providing as much reasonable cushion as I can. Now, there's a fine line between underwriting aggressively and underwriting conservatively. Obviously, if you underwrite everything too conservatively, you'll never take down a deal and you will never get your foot in the door. But if you underwrite too aggressively, that sort of sets you up for failure. And I've seen a lot of people in this industry where one bad deal have totally sunk them, and they're kind of out of multifamily because they went bankrupt or couldn't uh, perform on just one asset. So it is a fine line that you have to play, and I think the thing that I like to repeat is that you have to make sure that you're underwriting for your own risk profile. If you are super aggressive in life, if you're willing to take those big risks, if you're willing to get rich or go bankrupt, if that's the game that you're willing to play, then that's okay. Who am I to tell you to underwrite differently? But for me, I am looking for long-term growth. I'm okay taking it step by step, and so I underwrite according to how I foresee myself preferring that journey to go. And so I make sure that my rent growth numbers are reasonable, that I always look at, when I'm trying to project what a unit will go for after renovations, I take a cluster of very nearby properties with nearby amenities, and I take let's say like the 75% quartile. So I don't try to go too high. I don't try to go too low. I try to go right above the average rent. And so that's the number that I use. Some people might take a look at the nicest apartments that are nearby and use that as their rent, but that's just not what I do. Even in terms of expenses, even if we take on properties that are fully renovated and sort of are stable as assets, I don't project anything less than, say, like high 40% in terms of expenses, even from year one. I know some people that are more aggressive and think that, oh, this is a stabilized asset. Year one, we can have 40% expenses. So there's a lot of little levers that you can pull to make a deal work for you or not work for you. But I think it's just important to make sure that you understand what you're getting yourself into. There's nothing wrong with taking risks if you want to go to Atlantic City and play roulette. There's nothing wrong with that. You just have to understand what you're doing. You have to understand that there is a high probability that you might lose everything. But if you're okay with that and if you make peace with that, that's all that really matters. And so I know, I mean, this is kind of bias coming from the underwriter. That's why I tell people that you have to at least understand the basics of underwriting so that you know that the deal that you're getting yourself into matches what you're looking for. If the other person that underwrote for you is super aggressive, but you're really, risk mitigated, then you might not be getting into the deal that you think that you're getting yourself into, or vice versa. If your underwriter is very, passive and risk mitigated, but you're willing to take risks, then you would never have a deal pencil, and maybe you'll spend years before you get into anything. So, yeah, I think it's all about just matching what you want out of life with the types of deals that you take down.
The thing that you said that really jumps out to me is, matching your risk mitigation with your own underwriting approach. And I would say on top of that, it's understanding the numbers, like you said, when you're putting in the data, it's confirming and understanding that data. So if you are going to be aggressive, which, I don't think anybody really advocates for that, but know where you're being aggressive and know how to mitigate that approach, right? So for instance, if you are assuming a low cap rate on the exit, if you're wrong, then what? And if you can put a plan in place to say, okay, hey, I know I'm being aggressive here, but here's how I'm going to mitigate that risk in case I'm wrong, then you're being, at least a little more conservative, not reckless, right? I think what we've run into concerns with other operators and people whose deal comes across our desk is they don't know, right? They put that 7% rent growth, they've put a very low exit cap rate, and they don't even know where they're being aggressive or risky, right? So they don't know the lever to pull to counter that or how to protect themselves. And that's where I think people get into a lot of danger. If you were to have a high rent growth, but the property cash flowed. If you didn't have that rent growth, well, okay, maybe you don't make as much money as you thought you were going to make, but the deal's still going to perform. So those are really, really important, nuances, but really important aspects. And it's why everyone should at least have a high level understanding of underwriting beyond just, what NOI is, but when you are making those future projections, you should have a general sense of what these numbers mean or what these assumptions are. So you also understand what needs to be true to hit this. And then if we're wrong, what does that do to the deal? We could talk about underwriting for days and days. But if folks want to learn more, they can definitely check out your website, compoundingcapitalgroup.com, as well as the underwritinglab.com. Right now, we're going to transition to our round of insights. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right, let's go. Jason, give me a failure or an apparent failure that sets you up for later success.
Failure or apparent failure? That's a good question. I failed plenty of times on my own when I was doing single family homes. One of the biggest mistakes that I made was over renovating. On paper, everything can look good. If I say, oh, I'm going to spend, these are single family homes, so the numbers are larger. But if I spend $50,000 on a renovation, I'll get $400 a month rent bump. And so the ROI looks great. But the reality often is that just because you hope that your unit will get a certain level of rent does not mean that it actually will. And so that's helped me translate to being incredibly cost conscious when we're doing renovations for our apartments. So we try to keep it on like an ROI per dollar level, where we try to, every single dollar that we spend on a renovation, we want at least 25% return within the first year, so that by the time that we exit, we would have either at least broken even or, maybe even a little bit of profit on the renovation dollars. So yeah, that's one of the biggest mistakes that I still probably pay for, just spending way too much money on my single family homes and not getting the rent increases that I needed.
Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
That's a good question. As simple as this may sound, I really love the Google Suite. As someone that, I used to do a lot of coding, I don't do that anymore because I have too many partners. I need to be able to share data and insights and share documents. So just as something as simple as making sure that everything is organized in a Google Drive just makes your life so much easier, and it makes you just seem a lot more professional. Like every time we have an asset management call, the recording goes in a specific folder that everyone has access to. Anytime we take down a deal, I save all of the legal documents and the underwriting and the title documents all in one folder. So even something as simple as sort of the cloud can help you, find success in multifamily.
Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
Definitely Who Not How. I think I have oh yeah, actually I have a copy back there. But I absolutely something that I think I read it multiple years ago, but something that I reread at least once a year. Just this idea that partnerships are crucial to scaling. Now, I don't have desires to, have 50,000 units and have like a massive empire with like 50 employees. Jay and I kind of want to keep small and lean, but that still means that we need other key partners that are able to offset the weaknesses that we have. And the idea of Who Not How is, again, instead of trying to find a way that you can do it yourself, just find the right person that can kind of do that for you, grow together, grow faster, grow more. And so, yeah, highly recommend the book, and very popular within the industry too.
What's a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals?
I love to journal. That's a habit that I picked up, actually based off another book called, I think it was called Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. But I mean, for those of you who have read the book, it essentially talks about having a very specific routine every single morning where you meditate, you read, you write, you work out for a little bit, you, I don't know, prepare your meals. I actually have done all of that, but I discovered that things like meditation don't really help me long term. I enjoy it, but it's something that I kind of gave up after a few years. But journaling is something that I kept. And I feel like when life is noisy, when there's so much stuff to do, when there's so many people reaching out, I think just jotting down what your priorities are for the day, and making sure you sort of reiterate what your life goals are, or like your major goals or major milestones that you want to hit, definitely helps me stay focused and make sure that I'm working towards my true purpose every single day.
All right, give me your number one insight for underwriting multifamily deals.
Number one insight for underwriting. That's a good question. So my for anyone that's sort of new to multifamily or underwriting, the thing in hindsight that has saved me so many hours and hours of time is always starting with the big picture and then whittling yourself down to sort of the granular details. So I used to underwrite essentially any deal that crossed my desk because I thought that every deal had a possibility of working. And I would get excited if I saw a deal that had really amazing returns. And then I discovered that it's in sort of like a D area that has a lot of crime, or, hasn't really gentrified in a number of years. So it's only when I turned that underwriting process on its head that I became a lot more efficient. And I felt like that's when I became a true underwriter. So always look at the neighboring area first, make sure that it's got, the commercial retail that you're looking for. You're looking for, grocery stores, you're looking for good schools, you're looking for, some signs of life. And then once you feel comfortable with that, that's when you look at the details of the deal itself. It's sort of similar to, you know, what people say in single family is that you can't really control the neighborhood. You can only control the house that you buy. So make sure you're in the right neighborhood first before you spend time kind of spending hours underwriting deals.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, I know you are in Jersey. What part of Jersey are you actually in?
Central Jersey, I'm like maybe 15 minutes from Princeton.
All right, so let's just use Princeton, or you can adjust the place, but give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
I'll grab a bite to eat. That's a good question. It's actually near Princeton, but there's a great sushi place that's been around ever since that I was like a young kid. So I actually grew up in the area too. It's been around for 20 plus years. I still go to this day. It's called Sushi Palace. It does have an all-you-can-eat option if you're, especially hungry, but they just have like really fresh fish that I just love. And I joke to my wife that I'm in multifamily. Like I need to make money purely to feed my love of sushi because sushi is kind of expensive. So yeah, it'll be a continuing effort.
I love it. Well, listen, we'll make sure you put sushi place or sushi palace.
Palace.
Palace. There you go. We'll make sure you put that on the list in the show notes there if anybody wants to check that out near Princeton. Jason, you gave us a lot of great insights today, talking about your transformation coming from a data scientist, taking advantage of that little gap, that window you had to be an entrepreneur, getting into real estate, starting with some flip projects, and kind of building up your knowledge base and getting your feet wet. Partnerships, going through a dozen or so partnerships before landing on one that really can help you elevate your business, and time you took to cultivate that relationship and get to know each other, and then ultimately what it takes to build a great partnership, and then talking to us about underwriting, some of the common mistakes you see, areas where people can get stronger, and then flipping that paradigm on its head, right? So instead of going straight for the deal and underwriting, really looking at the big picture, looking at the market, trying to understand what is the plan and the opportunity before you put pen to paper there. Really great insights all around. Again, if anybody wants to check you out or learn more, they can go to your website, check you out at compoundingcapitalgroup.com or theunderwritinglab.com. Jason, thanks again for being a great guest and coming on Multifamily Insights. We look forward to staying in touch with you, and I hope you have a great day.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John.